Even as the percentage of vaccinated Americans grows, the COVID-19 lockdowners seem to be preparing us for even more strict measures in the name of public health. We're a long way from 15 days to slow the spread. But right now, friends, it's time to hold the line.
Hi there, I'm Jill Biden here at the White House with our two dogs, Champ and Major. For a lot of us during this pandemic, our pets have been such a source of joy and comfort, and maybe a bark or two on a video conference. The unconditional love from a dog is one of the most beautiful things on earth, and we owe it to them to keep ourselves healthy. So please keep wearing your masks, even when you're out walking your dog.
Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. That was First Lady Jill Biden during a break in yesterday's Puppy Bowl, advising Americans to wear a mask even when you're out walking your dogs. Now, I agree with her, dogs are amazing, but this whole mask thing, outside alone, this is pure propaganda. There's no evidence that you're at risk of contracting or transmitting COVID-19 while you're outdoors taking Fido for a stroll. People go out and walk their dogs, I do this every day, by themselves. How are you going to be spreading a virus out in the open air alone with your dog just walking around? We're starting to see the beginnings of the nightmare scenario that some of us, including me, have been warning you about. You see, you've probably thought for the last 3 or 4 months at least that with these highly effective vaccines in distribution, you might get some of your life back soon here. Maybe even by the summer of 2021, things would be pretty normal. The masks would come off, schools and restaurants open. Well, maybe not in the summer for schools, but you know what I mean. And they should be, by the way. They should have summer school. Even weddings and concerts, those could be back in action soon too. Think again. The lockdowners and the mask cultists have other plans for you. If you look, you're already seeing it. Now the media tells us that the pace of vaccinations, the spread of new strains, all that stuff means that COVID is going to be around for years, maybe even decades. It will become endemic, like the flu, as written in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. At a minimum, this means arbitrary, idiotic mitigation measures like outdoor masking, double masking, filling out test and trace forms, random temperature checks, because that's really saving people. That could become the new normal forever. It'll probably be far more intrusive and destructive than that in the short term, too. And one thing is for sure already. They're planning to drag out the pain, misery, and control that they have as a result of COVID as long as they can. There are too many people who have so much emotionally invested in their belief in science, which, can we just say, in and of itself is an absurd idea. Belief in science? Science is or is not. It is based in fact. Someone's belief in it is irrelevant. This idea that there are some people that don't believe in science is absurd on its face. There's always supposed to be debate and disagreement and back and forth over major questions, in this case of policy. It's not science to determine how long we lock down, who gets locked down, how long we mask. These are policy judgments. There's no science that answers this. But it just feels so virtuous for MSNBC watchers to sneer at the evil anti-mask Trump supporters while working class people actually deliver their packages and food to them, keep showing up at their jobs, at the grocery store, at the supermarket, at the corner drugstore. They're still doing their jobs. And all the first responders and police and fire and EMS personnel, they're doing their jobs. But there are some people that aren't in any rush to let you have your life back. No, quite the opposite. They've already conditioned much of the American public to become brainless sheep who just do whatever the bureaucrats with stethoscopes on TV tell them, or what the feckless politicians claim the lab-coated bureaucrats say. I mean, they have created a turnkey totalitarian society. We're just a few steps away from you do exactly what they say when they say it. Do you really think they're going to give all that power back before at least giving the abuse of power a test drive for a year or two? The left loves to leverage a crisis. They want control. They believe in the state, in government, making you do things for the betterment of the collective, not for you as an individual. And this crisis lets them literally control your ability to breathe freely. So yes, they are going to find endless excuses to extend COVID lockdown misery. That doesn't mean that it'll be the same all throughout. No, of course, there are going to be some restaurant reopen in New York coming up soon. There's going to be but they maintain the ability to keep the power to do this again. They've now set the standard. COVID's not going away entirely. You think the mask mandates are going to go away? You think that they're going to say, you know what, let's just see what happens next fall, next wintertime? Absolutely not. Our current pace for vaccinations means that there will be at least years, perhaps even a decade or more, before the whole world reaches herd immunity and America's a global hub. People will come here who have COVID. And until we get to the point where we are at effectively the eradication of the virus, there will be voices out there in the public health community who are telling you that we have to stay on this path. Sure, you can have some freedom back now, but they reserve the right to take it away from you. Maybe you'll be able to go to church in a couple of months, but next fall, next winter, they might tell you the First Amendment doesn't count anymore. You may have already figured this out, seeing as that totalitarian smurf in a lab coat, Dr. Fauci, has said that double masking is probably a good idea until the virus is totally gone. Actually, Fauci said that 2 masks was logical. Then he said that there's no science to prove that. Then Biden advisor Dr. Michael Osterholm said publicly that 2 masks were actually worse than 1. Then Fauci said, well, 2 masks can't hurt. And then he said they're waiting on data from the CDC to show whether 2 masks are in fact better. Anyone want to place bets on what that CDC data is going to say? You think it's going to back the Fauci up on this one? Oh, what a surprise. All that took place in a week. Listen to the science, they say. This has become a rallying cry for those too frightened to think for themselves or too infatuated with controlling others and their own virtue in that process to understand and accept that life comes with risks. And there is no perfect security, certainly not from handing over autonomy to the state. Here's what the science actually tells anybody who's been following this closely and being honest. Open up the schools, and it was wrong to ever close them. Stop wearing masks outside by yourself. Everyone who's at low risk should start living normal lives as soon as possible, and everyone who's vaccinated should go back to normal life right now. Not next fall or next year, now. Oh yeah, and by the way, the lockdowns, they did not work, and they weren't necessary, and Florida is the real-life experiment that proves this. The debate should be over there, but it'll never end, because instead of embracing the truth and the freedom that would come with it, the lockdown left is doubling down. They're going to tell you to mask up next winter, if not for COVID, for the flu. This is now the expectation. Otherwise, you're just a vector of disease, possibly killing grandma. Oh, and the next winter after that, and the one after that too. Get ready for years of this madness, just coming and going in waves. So here's the choice we have. Americans can either take back their freedom, or we can have it doled out to us in small doses, like squirts of useless hand sanitizer. All right, Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans were out in force celebrating last night after their team very soundly defeated the Kansas City Chiefs. I saw that one. Of course, the killjoys in the media had to cry about, you guessed it, insufficient outdoor masking. Talk about that and just the general state of things in Florida versus the corporate media's view of COVID with Anna Paulina Luna when we come back. I want you to take me up on my recommendation to visit doneforyoubuck.com, where you can learn more about my friends at Done For You Real Estate. If you haven't checked them out, let me make this easy for you. These guys have found a way to make real estate investing easy, and their system flat out works. It allows everyday, hardworking Americans to finally own investment real estate without all the risk and difficulty of doing it on your own. I can't possibly tell you in strong enough terms during this 60-second commercial how important it is that you check these guys out. So how about this? If you visit doneforyoubuck.com, at the top of the page is a podcast interview I did with Done For You Real Estate, where you can hear my experience with their company in my own words. Visit doneforyoubuck.com, listen to the podcast interview, and give my friends a chance to show you what they can do for you at Done For You Real Estate. It's an in-depth interview. I really take you through each stage of my process and how successful it's been so far. Doneforyoubuck.com. Listen to that podcast interview at the top of the page and begin your real estate investment journey today. The media's tattletale culture is reaching new heights as a double-masked CNN reporter admits to ratting out the maskless Super Bowl partygoers out there, asking Tampa police how they plan on shutting down those Buccaneers celebrations. Watch.
We are at the Pour House in Tampa, which is a very lively bar and restaurant, which is why I am double masked. A lot of people are here, they're gathered, they're already cheering for their favorite team. They're outside, so it's considered to be safer, and they are allowed to be here. They're only supposed to take their masks off while they're eating or drinking. Let me show you a scene from last night. This massive crowd, again, not many of them wearing a mask. There were some police there, but we're unsure about citations. I spoke to the Tampa police and I asked them, what are you doing about it?
What are you doing, police? There are people outside celebrating, living their lives, and some of them are outdoors and they don't have a mask on. This is the country we live in now, at least according to the journos out there. But they forgot they're in Florida. It's a little bit different. For someone to weigh in on what's going on after that Super Bowl, the politics all around it, who's on the ground in Tampa, former congressional candidate Anna Paulina Luna. Anna, good to see you again.
Thank you for having me back on.
So, Florida is having quite a year, and I mean the last 12 months or so. Obviously, big win for Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But it was fascinating to see so many journalists using the Super Bowl being held in Tampa and what was going on there as a mask shaming and COVID lockdown teaching moment, as if they don't pay attention to what's really going on in Florida, which is that they've taken a different approach and it has been a better one. We can see all the numbers.
I mean, I figured that these would be the same journalists that'd be listening to science. And we know that science is saying that the mask did not work, that COVID has a 99.9% survival rate. And good thing that we had DeSantis, that he was able to distribute the vaccines to the elder population. And really, those that felt that they were not at risk were able to go out and support the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and really help sustain local economy.
You mentioned Governor Ron DeSantis, who's having his conservative hero moment. Here he is talking about the reality of how his state has been doing when it comes to COVID.
In Florida, every single person has a right to earn a living, and our unemployment rate is lower than the national average. We have less COVID mortality per capita than the national average. 25 states are higher. So the lockdowns don't work on their own, but they cause catastrophic damage to society. So what we've been able to do is other states have tried to lock people down. We've tried to lift people up.
It was hard. It felt like the media was triggered, Anna, when they saw people enjoying their lives in Florida last night, celebrating the victory of a Trump-supporting quarterback with Tom Brady, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Felt like they couldn't really, the corporate media couldn't see the joy.
Oh, I mean, these were the same people that try to take the time during the Super Bowl ads to run their social justice campaigns. And I think that really Americans as a whole are tired of it. You know, it was interesting. I was walking around the mall prior to the actual Super Bowl. So I was less than a block away from the arena. And there were people from all states there walking around, really, frankly, to just be left alone. They were happy to be out and about. And, you know, it's really sad that we are seeing that journalists, that people are now taking an American pastime, something that's supposed to bring joy to people, bring people together, and they're now simply trying to use it as a partisan event.
You mentioned the politics around all this, of course. In a moment of supposed unity, now this was a commercial to be fair, but the messaging was getting a lot of eye rolls. I'd say I was certainly one of them. Here's some of that now infamous Bruce Springsteen, you know, Uniting America commercial.
It's no secret. The middle has been a hard place to get to lately. Between red and blue, between servant and citizen, between our freedom and our fear. And as for freedom, it's not the property of just the fortunate few. It belongs to us all. Whoever you are, wherever you're from. It's what connects us, and we need that connection. We need the middle. We can make it to the mountaintop, through the desert, and we will cross this divide.
I mean, people can think what they want about the actual ad. I thought it was a lot of kind of pompous BS, and what does it have to do with a kind of mediocre car company? But anyway, I thought the more interesting choice here, Anna, was that they go to a guy with Bruce Springsteen from the Jersey Shore to then travel to Kansas in cowboy boots like he's a rancher to deliver a message of unity When we all know, because he's very vocal about it, Bruce Springsteen is vicious about Trump, Trump supporters. He's completely a sufferer of Trump derangement syndrome. That's the messenger for unity they go to.
I mean, that's a commercial that clearly only applies to people that supported the Biden administration, because we all know that Twitter, Facebook, I mean, American Express, even different, Venmo, and also to Spotify, don't necessarily support the conservative message and really made a statement in coming out against the president. So, those types of commercials, as much as I appreciate the sentiment, it's very obvious that when you observe people's actions that they really feel another way. And I really feel like America as a whole is in an abusive relationship with the Democrat Party. I feel like a lot of people feel that if they speak out and speak against kind of the cancel culture that we're seeing, that they themselves will be canceled, and that's not right. So hopefully maybe that commercial wasn't too expensive, because I don't think that it really got the message across how it should have.
I just think that the choice of messenger, and who knows what they even paid them, but the choice of messenger was a strange one. By the way, there's some more media hypocrisy here with Vice News. The winner of the Super Bowl could be COVID-19, but the celebrations you see here, on the left you have the Super Bowl, COVID-19, people outdoors. This is not a big indoor gathering, people outdoors. That's a huge COVID risk. Then Vice, back when Biden was initially announced as the winner on November 8th here on the right, you can kind of see, Vice was totally fine with huge gatherings outside all across the country celebrating Joe Biden. Where's the science in this, Anna?
I mean, I love it that you guys do this side by side, because it really does show how hypocritical that they are. I mean, if it doesn't really adhere to what they want, it's all about control, they will go back on exactly what they said. And they did something similar, I think, too, about the BLM riots, these massive, massive protests. And then they said that that was okay. The ma and pa stores that were sitting there trying to keep food on the table for their families, they were all of a sudden were these COVID hotspots. So it really does go to show that I think that, the woke-topians and Vice media as a whole, it is really partisan. And I'm glad that you guys were able to call them out on the nonsense, because frankly, it's good for people to see that's literally partisan nonsense.
Anna Paulina Luna from down in the land of freedom, Florida, down in Tampa. Congrats again on your home team picking up a big W. And if you see Tom Brady, tell him the Buckster owes him a shot of tequila.
Thank you.
Violence in the streets of America's capital this weekend as Antifa members threaten to burn down Washington, D.C. They actually said, burn it down. Oh, wait, you didn't hear about that? Oh, don't worry, you're not alone. We'll do a deep dive into the media's selective silence in the Buck Brief. That was this past weekend in our nation's capital, a city that overwhelmingly voted for President Joe Biden, I might add. Remember, we were told that good old Grandpa Joe would be a return to peace and normalcy, that the riots we saw all last summer were only because of Donald Trump's inflammatory rhetoric? Those were disingenuous lies. It's very clear the summer of love is now going to be a perpetual year-long routine in this country, regardless of who holds office. This will continue until Democrats finally reject political violence in all its forms, something that they've not been willing to do. Instead, they're too busy hypocritically politicizing the riot at the Capitol on January 6th, using it as carte blanche to go after all Trump supporters, now painting with the broadest possible brush. Let's examine their hypocrisy, of course, on today's Buck Brief. If we're going to be able to find a middle ground, if we're going to be able to come together as a country, we have to establish what clear principles are. The riot on January 6th has been resoundingly condemned by conservatives all across the media, by the GOP, by the Republican Party. Do Democrats really condemn the Antifa and BLM riots that happened all throughout 2020 and continue to this day? Do they not have a problem with people marching through neighborhoods, threatening to burn it down? I thought incitement to violence was something Democrats were particularly concerned about right now. And before anybody says, oh, but some of these protests are only violent against property, as if that's not also in and of itself illegal. No, there have been police officers murdered. There have been people like David Dorn in St. Louis former officer David Dorn, who was working private security at a pawn shop, murdered by BLM rioters. This has happened. So we already know there has been violence. Antifa had someone kill an individual at one of these riots out on the West Coast. There have been deaths attributed to this movement. So why don't we see the same kind of outrage? Well, because there's a very clear protocol here that the left is okay with political violence that it likes. They will perhaps say they're not all on board for it, but they'll mitigate it. They'll minimize the damage, the bad side. They'll refer to it as a mostly peaceful protest. Yet another example of this, you had a sitting member of Congress, Cori Bush, who, in response to a prison riot in St. Louis, tweeted, "A riot is the language of the unheard." Now, I am quite certain that Congresswoman Bush would not ever use that quote in reference to, say, the January 6th riot, nor should she. But why would she use it for a prison riot where there was violence used against prison guards who hadn't done anything wrong? It was not their fault. If they have grievances, it's not fair to hold people just doing their jobs accountable here. But a prison riot gets support from members of Congress, or this member of Congress, I should say. She's not the only one. Ayanna Pressley has also spoken about unrest in the streets and the difference between left-wing and right-wing protest violence and riots. Here's what she said.
I'm looking to the public. You know, this is as much about public outcry and organizing and mobilizing and applying pressure so that this GOP-led Senate and that these governors that continue to carry water for this administration, putting the American peoples in harm's way, turning a deaf ear to the needs of our families and our communities, hold them accountable. Well, make the phone call, send the email, show up. You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives. And unfortunately, there's plenty to go around.
Now, unrest is often used as a euphemism for riots on the left. Otherwise, you just call it protest. You just call it peaceful protest and enjoying one's First Amendment rights. But there's a clear difference here. There's a clear double standard at play between anything that can be even generally associated with the right that results in destruction, violence of any kind, and the continuing culture of anarchic left-wing violence that is constantly excused in the media under this broad rubric of justice. It's always about justice. Really? In the summer of 2020, were they breaking into Louis Vuitton stores and stealing handbags? Were they breaking into Foot Locker and stealing sneakers for justice? Is that what the left-wing protesters, the Democrats out there were doing? When Antifa was shining lasers in the eyes of federal officers by their own admission to try to blind them? Is that about justice? No, if I remember correctly, and I do, the Democrat Party and media were saying the problem, at least on the West Coast over the summer, in Portland and Washington State, was that the presence of federal law enforcement was inflaming the situation. In fact, Democrats are very quick to throw law enforcement under the bus the moment it's politically convenient in the face of a riot. We have Kamala Harris, you'll remember this. In Minnesota, they burned down a police station in Minneapolis. If you're able to chip in, Kamala wrote on Twitter, chip in now at the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. So bail out the people breaking the law. I mean, if this isn't advocacy for violating the law in the pursuit of some very vague justice goal, what is? She's now the Vice President of the United States. Megyn, make sure that we bail out those people who are burning down buildings. Make sure we bail out as quickly as possible anybody arrested for violence against a police officer during the riots in Minneapolis. This is the Democrat Party. And just also show, I want to know, over the weekend in D.C., it's amazing. D.C. is feels like a very small place. It's a city that gets a lot of media attention, but it's not all that large. This was going on. They're harassing, these Antifa lunatics are squaring off against police because they were harassing diners and threatening people. How would you feel if that were a family member of yours? How would you feel if that were, your son, your daughter, your grandma, your grandpa sitting down for the very rare occasion to actually enjoy normal life, because the lockdowners are a bunch of lunatics who want to continue this stuff well beyond when any facts, data, or reasonable approach would say that it makes sense. But should they be subjected to this menacing from these left-wing lunatics? Well, the answer from the media's perspective is yes, because they're Biden voters. Yes, because they vote the right, they support the right political party, so their insanity is to be excused, if not encouraged. And it's very troubling to see this. But there are BLM protests happening in Rochester, too. They were shutting down roads there. So is this, and we showed you this before, is this, what exactly is this doing to help the cause of justice? Or is it just self-aggrandizement and virtue signaling for the very vain and petty and childish among us? I'd ask you that question. I think we all know the answer. Cancel culture once again rearing its ugly head, this time taking aim at a New York Times science reporter. You're not really going to believe why when I tell you. Professor Gad Saad is coming up next to discuss the latest victim of this cancel culture after the break. These days, being prepared for the unknown is more important than ever. I'm sure you've noticed the world we live in today is anything but predictable, and we can all benefit from something reliable right about now. Well, what could be more reliable than real gold and silver? I'm talking about real gold and silver you can actually hold right in your hands. Call the Oxford Gold Group now and learn how easy it is to get real gold and silver sent securely directly to your home, or how you can have real gold and silver placed in your IRA or 401k. Just call the Oxford Gold Group at 833-600-GOLD and ask for your free guide on owning gold and silver. Again, call the Oxford Gold Group right now at 833-600-GOLD. The Oxford Gold Group is the only gold company I trust. Don't wait for inflation to start rising. Don't wait for the stock market to have a massive correction. Then it's too late. Protect your wealth and your retirement now with real gold and silver. Call the Oxford Gold Group at 833-600-GOLD. One more time, that's 833-600-GOLD. No one is safe from cancel culture, not even folks who work at the New York Times for decades. Donald McNeil, a top reporter whom the paper just nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the coronavirus pandemic, left the company Friday after fallout from an incident that occurred back in 2019. Listen to this. After an educational trip to Peru, 26 students and parents complained that McNeil used the N-word while repeating a story at dinner one night. The Times investigated the complaints, reprimanded McNeil, apologized to the families, and quietly closed the case. Until last week, 150 Times staff members wrote a letter saying they were offended and felt disrespected by McNeil's comments and wanted further action taken, resulting in McNeil resigning. So when the mob comes knocking, you better do anything and everything to satisfy them, including getting rid of one of your top reporters. That's what the New York Times decided. Joining me now to discuss this and more is Gad Saad. He is the author of The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. I'm telling him right now his next book should be The Voice of Gad. Good to have you, sir.
Hey, so good to be with you again, Buck.
So I want you to walk us through how, a place like the New York Times, really the high temple of liberalism, at least when it comes to journalism, views an incident like this. This guy had worked there for something like 40 years. He's been in the New York Times a very, very long time. He didn't use this ethnic slur. He didn't use the N-word directed to anybody. He didn't use it in a flippant sense. He quoted somebody else when he was being told a story about the usage of that word. He's essentially, you're telling me that so-and-so said this word, he said it, and then he was giving his opinion on what punishment that person should face. So the utterance of the word, as the New York Times says, irrespective of intent, is cause for cancellation. What the heck is going on here?
Well, this is exactly like when some people now argue that even if you say something that is truthful, if it offends someone, then arguing that something is veridical and truthful is not a sufficient defense, right? So, imagine the Orwellian level we've reached when someone can actually argue that position. It's part of a general phenomenon that you see with totalitarian Puritanism, because where basically to demonstrate that you are pure in your ideological commitment, you have to look from within and extirpate the bad folks from within. Think about ISIS, right? ISIS will typically kill other Muslims because they're not pure enough. So what's happening with the orgiastic self-cannibalism of the left is that when we can no longer get rid of, Trump supporters and so on. We turn inwards and we kill those who have, violated our edicts. So it's classic stuff. Can I give you one example that I discuss in the book that even beats the New York Times one?
Yeah.
So in The Parasitic Mind, I talk about the case. Let me just get her name. Jodi Kelly, who was a dean at Seattle University. Some students had asked her to suggest an authors so that they can diversify their reading curriculum. And so she suggested a book by a Black civil rights activist by the name of Dick Gregory. The name of the book was the N-word. So she suggested, as a progressive position, here's a book that you should be reading. The book title was the N-word. She gave the book title. She was out of a job. So the insanity is never going to end unless clear-thinking people say, we've had enough, this has to stop.
And I feel like people need to understand as well that, the word at the issue of the New York Times is colloquially known now as the N-word. And it's said a lot by some people, and it is never allowed to be said by others. That is the rule now. I first of all think that banning a word in all contexts and all usage is inherently flawed. I mean, I would wonder what a court stenographer who has to read back a conversation that occurred between two people who are on trial, for example, what do they say? Or they have to change the word all the time. But more than that, it's not just going to be, it never stops there. It won't just be that word that is only weaponized against some people, meaning the usage of the word weaponized against some people. There was an effort by a New York Times reporter that just happened last week, the R word, which I believe you can still say to retard one's progress in vaccination research, but you obviously cannot use that word going to, and it is a terrible thing to say to a person or about a person, that we can all understand there are moral judgments we can make about word. But just the usage of that word in a conversation, a New York Times reporter thought Mark Andreessen, the famous VC investor, said it. He didn't say it, but she reported he said it because she wanted to ruin him. This is what journalists do now.
Listen, I was banned. The only time that I've been banned on Twitter, I think it was a 12-hour ban. It was because I was having a spicy exchange with some imbecile. I think we could still say imbecile. So I was having some exchange with some random imbecile, and I called him because he was being very insulting. So I called him a degenerate, retarded schmuck. And I was banned because apparently the R word was simply beyond the pale. I'm not allowed to use it. It's grotesque. It's insane. It's exactly the opposite of building anti-fragile societies, and it has to end.
And I want you to tell me about your little feud with Mr. Seth Rogen, who used to make sort of slapstick, weed-based comedy. And now you wrote a piece, The Moral Hypocrisy of Celebrities, the Case of Seth Rogen. But there's quite a lot going on here. Tell us what the piece said, but also you weren't allowed to say this.
Yeah, so basically it started with me posting a clip on my YouTube channel where I was discussing sort of the platitudinous virtue signaling that all of these, idiots engage in, right? And I was arguing using very fancy scientific concepts, specifically the concept in evolutionary biology of costly signaling. The idea being that for a signal to be honest, it has to be costly, right? Putting hashtag Je suis Charlie doesn't cost you anything. And so it is vacuous, empty signaling, right? So I use principles from evolutionary biology to mock and critique all of these virtue signalers. And then someone tags Seth Rogen, and then I respond, yes, Seth Rogen is a perfect manifestation of this kind of, idiocy. Seth Rogen then writes to me and says what a moron I am and so on. So I offer him a rebuttal on how hypocritical he is to, wear a Che Guevara socialism T-shirt while being worth $80 million in the most capitalist of all industries in the most capitalist country in the history of humanity. And so I put all this together in a Psychology Today article. Now, just to give you the context, I've been with Psychology Today since 2008. This was my 312th article with them, over 7 million views. And they decided after it had become one of the 5 most popular articles in 30 minutes since posting, they yanked it because I used words that were mean and it wasn't right to be critiquing Seth Rogen without empirical evidence.
What were the words you used that were mean? I'm just curious. I mean, did you call him a...
in our exchange, I said, don't be a hypocritical fraud. And then I said, in referring to all of these elitist champagne socialists in Malibu, I called them vacuous, parasitic, virtue signaler, whatever.
I mean, so those are all, that's as close to fact as an opinion can get. So it's, it seems kind of rough that Psychology Today came after you with this.
You're banning me using the word parasitic. My book is titled The Parasitic Mind.
That's unbelievable. You wrote, Seth Rogen is a classic example of what I discuss here. And he replied, I watch your video. It's stupid. Why was I a left-wing socialist when I was broke and unemployed, according to your brilliant theory? How would you respond to Mr. Seth Rogen, Rogen's, he's taking a break from the weed, fart, and other jokes to engage here in the intellectual plane. What do you say to him?
Well, so you should go and read. It's a very long thread of rebuttals, but I'll just give you kind of the gist. I basically said that many young people are at first driven by, utopian imbecility, right? Because when you're young, you don't know any better. It really sounds nice that we're all equal and under socialism. But as E.O. Wilson famously said, the evolutionary biologist, regarding socialism, he said, great idea, wrong species, right? Socialism is great for a social ant because all social ants are equal other than the queen. Humans are hierarchical. We're not all equal. Some work harder, some are smarter, some are dumber, some are fatter. And so to impose equality and equity, well, equality is fine, but to impose equity or equality of outcomes on a species that is hierarchical is insanity. So I tried to explain this to him, but apparently it fell on deaf ears.
Well, at least our audience got to hear it. God Saad, The Parasitic Mind is the book. You should all pick up a copy of it. God, great to have you. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers, buddy. Thanks.
Almost time for a rapid-fire look at some of the stories we haven't gotten to yet but still deserve our attention. That's Quick Hits, and that is next. Joe Biden finally admits that Buck was right, although he didn't use my name, about school lockdowns. And the mayor of Tampa has got some scary things to say. Those stories are coming up in tonight's Quick Hits. Let's start with Joe Biden. Good old Grandpa Blue-Collar Joe is finally saying, okay, we really do actually have to open up the schools. We can't keep propping up the teachers union nonsense anymore if they keep doing this. Here's what he said.
Do you think it's time for schools to reopen?
I think it's time for schools to reopen safely. Safely. You have to have fewer people in the classroom. You have to have ventilation systems that have been reworked. Our CDC commissioner is going to be coming out with science-based judgment within, I think, as early as Wednesday as to lay out what the minimum requirements are.
Yeah, say they're going to figure out some way to make it entirely safe in the schools. They haven't been able to do that anywhere else in our lives, right? They haven't been able to eliminate COVID from everything else, but they're going to make it safe in the schools. So it is time to open up schools, but they've got an excuse for why they're going to delay this, because it has to be safely. Unbelievable, but this is what we have to deal with. And if you were wondering, why am I so set on trying to tell everybody that they're going to keep annoying us forever about this? The Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who, what does he know about transportation? Nothing, but who cares? Here he is saying that they're thinking about having everybody, before a domestic airline flight, got to make sure that we take a COVID test out on you.
What do you think of requiring a COVID test before someone flies, even domestically?
Well, there's an active conversation with the CDC right now. What I can tell you is it's going to be guided by data, by science, by medicine, and by the input of the people who are actually going to have to carry this out. Why not a COVID test before you can leave your home? I mean, it's not in the Constitution, right? I mean, kind of leaving your home is not in the Constitution. This is what the morons all say. They don't understand that we live in a free society, and that means sometimes you have to actually say enough. Enough with the nonsense. But I just, okay, when you go on planes, but when you go outside on the street now, you have to wear a mask. Why shouldn't you have to take a test before you go outside too? Nothing in the Constitution about that. This is what tyranny actually sounds and feels like, when people are no longer reasonable or rational in any way, and they say, do what we say or else. That's what we're up against now. It's crazy. Oh, and if you're wondering if there's more, there's always more. The mayor of Tampa, unfortunately, Florida has a good governor, but Tampa has a bad mayor. She said Mayor Jane Castor told everybody that maskless partiers would be identified by police, like they were leading some kind of
Jose Cuervo-fueled party insurrection. Here you go.
You know, we had tens of thousands of people all over the city, downtown, out by the stadium, Ybor City, down here in Channelside, and very, very few incidents. So I'm proud of our community, but those few bad actors will be identified, and the Tampa Police Department will handle it.
For not wearing a mask? Is that really what she's for not? They're going to identify who was not wearing a mask? It's got to be more. It's got to be more than that, guys. There's no way that could be. I mean, but who knows? People are crazy. They've gotten really crazy. You know where we're not going to be seeing a whole lot of success from this Biden administration? There's a lot of places. I know you're already saying there's a lot of places. But one place in particular where you can expect that this is just going to be a total mess is on U.S.-China foreign policy. China is going to be running circles around the Biden administration now because all they know is don't beat Trump on China, even though Trump was right on China. And you're going to hear a lot of this kind of mealy-mouthed, on the one hand, on the other hand stuff from Biden and the foreign policy team around him. You say, who are these people? You know, it's like we've put John Kerry, who's the yachts and ascots czar, in charge of global climate change policy. You've got Bloomberg. I know this is for the UN, but he's running around too. I mean, look at the foreign policy folks that are assembled around Biden. You know, Blinken. A classic establishment play. This guy has no outside-the-box thinking, no leadership qualities whatsoever. Did I say outside the box? I meant inside the box. Well, whatever. Here is Biden talking about Xi, and he's going to criticize him, but doesn't want to be too mean about the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping.
He's very bright. He's very tough. He doesn't have, and I don't mean as a criticism, just a reality, he doesn't have a democratic small d bone in his body. But he is, the question is, I've said to him all along, that we need not have a conflict, but there's going to be an extreme competition. And I'm not going to do it the way that he knows this, because he's been sending signals as well, that I'm not going to do it the way Trump did. We're going to focus on international rules of the road.
International rules of the road. Because you know what worked really well up until Trump when it came to dealing with China? Relying on those international rules, the rules of the road. I think it's really interesting as well that Biden, I don't mean this as a criticism. Why not? He's not democratic. He's an authoritarian. Oh, because Democrats like authoritarians. I almost forgot about that. And then I got to give a bit of a slow clap here. I was going to say golf clap, but that's not what you would do. A slow clap here. My favorite tweet of the night during the Super Bowl has got to go to Matt Walsh over at the Daily Wire for, with this win tonight, Tom Brady solidifies his status as the second best quarterback of all time behind Colin Kaepernick. Matt, you get the prize with that one. Well said, and oh so true. Oh, why should we watch the Super Bowl when Colin Kaepernick's not even allowed to be in it? Maybe he just wasn't very good. There's that. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.